Hey everybody, Trey here. Wanted to give a quick update this morning on today's portion of the multi-day stretch of severe weather that began yesterday across the central and southern plains and is now shifting off to the east, in particular across portions of the mid-south and southeast. Since our video yesterday morning, the SPC has upgraded to an enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 across portions of northeast Louisiana, far southeast Arkansas, and the central portion of Mississippi. That includes places like Alexandria, Louisiana, Vicksburg, Natchez, Jackson, Mississippi, Greenville, Mississippi. And I know this time of year is very tough for some folks there in western Mississippi, particularly Rolling Fork. Rolling Fork is under the gun today for that severe weather threat, that greatest severe weather threat. Does not look like any kind of similar setup to last year's event on March 24th. The 1-year anniversary was yesterday. So that's some good news, but we do have that elevated severe risk for that area in particular from the Mississippi Delta eastward into portions of central Mississippi today. So that is going to be our main severe weather threat for today. We do have a risk area, marginal risk area level 1 out of 5 across parts of the Central Plains into the Midwest. So the western half of Iowa, far eastern Nebraska into eastern Kansas and western and northwestern Missouri. There is a low-end all hazards risk up there as well. Tornado risk at 2% and a low-end wind and hail risk as well. So very marginal low-end severe threat up there for today's threat. But we do have a much greater threat within that enhanced risk area farther south. Tornado threat has been the reason for the upgrade. 10% hatched area for significant tornadoes potentially across that yellow shaded area there, from basically Alexandria, Louisiana to the Mississippi-Alabama border in that portion of the risk area, surrounded by a large 2 and 5% area. There is a risk for some damaging winds as well, 30% damaging wind risk in that corridor, and some large hail. Not going to be much of a threat down there really in the early portion of the convective life cycle this afternoon. As storms start to re-intensify, we are expecting perhaps a few stronger cores capable of some larger hail down there in that southern risk area. So let's go ahead and dive right in here. This is what's going on right now. Current look at the radar. We do have some leftover convection, some showers and storms stretching from southern Missouri down through eastern Oklahoma, western Arkansas, and in particular parts of the eastern half of Texas, with some of those stronger cores this morning. This is all left over from yesterday's event that has persisted into the overnight hours. Very weak. These storms have weakened since yesterday, so not much of a severe threat with these this morning. Perhaps a few low-end hail reports and some marginally severe wind reports may come out of these this morning, but the atmosphere is just not quite there yet to support the re-intensification of these storms into the afternoon. But we are expecting these storms to continue into the afternoon, and they will begin to re-intensify into our main severe threat later on, and we could see also some development out ahead of these storms later on to add to that severe threat as well. Here is our current 500 millibar map, and this is what we got going on right now. Big old trough parked across much of the continental U.S. at this point. Our little shortwave that moved through yesterday, that was the culprit of yesterday's event, is up in this region now across parts of Kansas into Missouri, moving into Iowa, associated with kind of that closed contour there here across Nebraska and Kansas. That is going to slowly shift off to the northeast today and provide a little bit of impetus for our severe weather threat, at least on the synoptic scale up there in that portion of the U.S. Our main trough down here is going to continue to dig down and eject off to the east. Might take on a little bit more of a neutral tilt as we go into this afternoon, but this strong belt of flow here associated with this trough going to start overspreading this region across East Texas into Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi later on this afternoon, and that is going to allow for strong forcing for ascent associated with this trough, as well as some strong surface forcing with our cold front. We'll take a look at that in a second. That is going to lead to a proliferation and re-intensification of the ongoing convection that is going on right now. That is going to continue into the afternoon and likely intensify as we get into the afternoon hours as that atmosphere becomes more primed for severe weather. Very potent trough, so you'd expect a very potent surface response, and that's exactly what we have gotten. Very, very wound up surface low here centered across Kansas this morning. Cold front probably draped down here to the south. Here's our kind of wind shift back in here. So our cold front back in here, that is going to surge off to the east today and catch up with really the dry line, and this ongoing convection provide a lot more forcing for ascent at the surface, and that will allow for the proliferation of storm coverage later on this afternoon as we get that forcing to come in. But very tightly wound surface low. That surface low is going to move off to the east slowly this afternoon as well. Not a whole lot of eastward movement of the entire trough as a whole, so we won't really see a ton of movement and change in the overall pattern here, but we will see a little bit of eastward motion here, and that will allow for that threat to persist, to occur across the Midwest, and then that threat to persist across the Mid-South and Southeast. Low-level jet going to be very strong this morning as well. We talked about how strong this low-level cyclone was expected to get, strengthening through the day yesterday and into the overnight hours, and we are left with a very strong low-level jet this morning. 50-plus knots of flow here from the Midwest down to the south, so a very strong batch of low-level flow here out ahead of this low-level cyclone centered across Nebraska and Kansas this morning. That will persist into the afternoon as well, because this cyclone is certainly not going to be weakening anytime soon with such a strong trough maintained in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. So very strong wind profiles here, and that is going to allow for moisture, something we really didn't see a whole lot of yesterday, at least in a robust fashion. Moisture is really rich moisture here is going to be streaming northward across this region and provide a very juicy air mass ahead of the ongoing storms to allow for that severe threat to take place across the southern portions of the risk area. Modest moisture going to be evident across the northern portion, the northern risk area, as we're just too far from that moisture source to really get robust moisture in at this kind of time frame. So, but we will have adequate enough moisture for a severe threat up there ahead of that surface cyclone. Here's a couple soundings from across the region. This is our 12Z Shreveport sounding from this morning, so northwest Louisiana. Very deep moist layer here, 62 over 60 at the surface. Very, very deep moisture, something we didn't see yesterday once again. Very limited moisture in the low levels yesterday, but that is going to change today as we get that strong, robust Gulf moisture to make its way inland for that Gulf Coast severe threat today, and very deep moisture at this point in the morning at Shreveport. The moist layer extending up almost to about 700 millibars here, beneath what appears to be a little bit of an elevated mixed layer. Not something you see a lot of in the southeast, but that is going to quickly erode as the forcing moves in later on today. Forcing from the cold front as well will provide an opportunity for that any remaining capping inversion to erode, and whatever capping inversion there is at this point is fairly weak. So not going to take a whole lot to get that capping inversion to go away. Farther to the south, not quite as deep moisture, interestingly enough, a little bit more dry air there from 850 millibars and above. That moist layer extends up to about 850 millibars, a little bit deeper, a little bit better surface moisture down to the south, not surprisingly closer to the moisture source, but a little bit more dry air aloft. Not expecting that to be too much of an issue today. We should see pretty good moistening as we go into the afternoon. Wind profiles, though, already favorable for severe weather, strong deep layer shear. That is expected to increase as we go into the afternoon as that stronger flow aloft makes its way in, and strong low-level shear in the lowest few kilometers, strongly veering and strengthening winds with height, leading to strong low-level shear and a hint that strong warm advection is ongoing at the surface, warm moist advection ongoing at the surface to pump that moisture inland. Up here to the north, we'll take a sounding here at Topeka this morning, and that is a pretty classic looking cold core-esque type sounding. Limited instability at this point, but whatever instability is there is all packed beneath about 500 millibars. So any storms up in the northern portions of the risk area today are going to be very much low-top storms. We should see storms or instability blossom a little bit this afternoon, probably going to remain on the low side, but we should expect to see a few hundred joules per kilogram of mixed layer CAPE up there. Probably some strong low-level instability that will develop as well. 0 to 3 kilometer CAPE should skyrocket this afternoon as we get the colder air aloft from the shortwave trough to move in, as well as that forcing from the trough to move in as well. That should allow for some destabilization of that atmosphere. Plus surface heating, of course. We should see some surface heating up there as well this afternoon to get a little bit of that instability there in the lowest few kilometers of the atmosphere to provide for a low-topped supercell threat with that low-end all hazards risk. All right, let's look at some model data. This is the 12Z NAM that is coming in as we speak. 12Z NAM initialized this morning. This is how it was initialized, and you see that little shortwave there, little belt of flow associated with that shortwave moving up off to the northeast as we go through the day today. And here's our main trough down here across much of Mexico, impinging upon the southern U.S. We'll go through the day today, and you see how not too much change in the overall pattern here at 500 millibars. That shortwave not doing too much motion, kind of gets absorbed into the flow almost, into the stronger belt of flow back to its southwest. We do have a little bit of extra forcing from that shortwave up there across Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Illinois region. But our main trough here starts to take on a little bit more of a neutral tilt as we go into the afternoon. Here's how we start. Axis of the trough, probably something like this. And as we go into the afternoon hours today, that trough kind of swings through into the southern U.S. and takes on a little bit more of a neutral tilt. Maybe a little bit, there's your axis. So something like that, or maybe that might be a little bit off, something like this perhaps. So slightly more neutrally tilted trough, maybe a little bit of a surface low response down here, but it will be limited, not as if we were seeing a really negatively tilted trough moving through here. That would promote a very robust low-level response. So we may see a little bit of additional surface low development here across the Arklatex region to aid in the severe threat down to the south, but not expecting too much, as our main surface low is going to be off here well to the north and providing that threat for the northern risk area. The trough continues to swing through tonight. That northern shortwave really takes on a negative tilt as we go into the day tomorrow. Low-end severe threat up here across parts of Illinois and Indiana tomorrow. Risk will persist into the Gulf Coast as well, but that is a pretty potent shortwave. Wouldn't be surprised to see some severe weather tomorrow as well across portions of the Midwest. We might look into that here at the end of the video, but wanted to focus on today's threat before we do anything else. So that is how things at 500 millibars are expected to progress as the day goes on today. How about we go down to the surface now? Take a look at our surface low. So as initialized by the NAM, surface low here across east central Kansas this morning, and that is going to move off to the east as we go on in to the afternoon hours today. Perhaps a little bit of surface low development down to the south. I think these closed contours that you see here, as I'll zoom in so you can see it a little bit better, these are associated with the ongoing convection. So not really expecting to see much in the way of surface low development down here. Maybe weak surface cyclogenesis here across the Arklatex, but not really anything of note that would substantially aid the setup down here across southern portions of the risk area. We do see nicely backed flow across this area, nice southeasterly flow at 10 to 20 knots. That is definitely favorable for increasing that low-level shear across this region, and so that will be a favorable characteristic for the wind profile down here across the southern portions of the risk area. So off to the north is going to be our main surface low. We'll zoom in here to our Midwest sector. So by early to mid-afternoon, this is at 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, our surface low, kind of that broad elongated surface low that we talked about yesterday, not really that tightly wound surface low that previous model runs were showing that would give us a little bit greater of this cold core type severe weather setup, but kind of this elongated surface low, not really a tightly wound surface low, and this is not super optimal for a cold core tornado threat in this area, although we do have some of the ingredients there. Low-level instability and the actual surface low and closed 500 millibar low itself, they are in close proximity to one another. The actual center of the closed low probably somewhere out in here. Our surface low out in here in this area off to the northeast. So we do have somewhat close proximity to one another. But overall, we usually with these cold core events, you want to see a nice tightly wound surface low up here in closer proximity to the 500 millibar low. So this is not your optimal setup for a cold core tornado type event, but we do still have enough here to provide a low end severe risk across this area with any low top convection ahead of the cold front, which looks to stretch across this area, it looks like by 4 p.m. as the NAM has it. A little bit of this frontal low, a little bit of a overall weird setup. Warm front kind of up in here, it looks like, or perhaps even farther to the north through that pressure tongue there. A little bit of a weird surface pattern. I'll just leave it at that. Let's take a look at our moisture up in here, and I'll zoom back out to the Kona sector so we can see how the overall moisture progresses. We already have low 40s dew points up in there. We did not look at our surface data yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So up here to the north, we already have upper 40s dew points, some low 50s dew points creeping into northern Kansas and to northern Missouri as well. So those low 50s dew points should continue ahead of that cold front going into the afternoon, provide at least adequate moisture up here across the northern portions of the risk area for a severe threat up there. You can see where our cold front is at this point. The clear wind shift, westerly or northwesterly winds to the west, southeasterly winds to the east. That is exactly where our cold front is. We can draw it in pretty accurately here today, and it kind of trails back off here. So again, here's our cold front. Cold front down here to the south will catch up to the ongoing convection and our dry line. Dry line appears to be somewhere in here at this point, where our moisture gradient is located. So that is going to kind of combine into one composite boundary later on today and provide the frontal forcing that we need for storms down in the southern risk area. Cold front will continue to shift slowly off to the east today. Not a whole lot of motion up there to the east going into the afternoon, but that will be our focus for storms up there in the northern portion of the risk area as well. So moisture will continue to stream northward ahead of that. Low, very limited moisture for sure, but enough with such strong kinematics and cold air aloft at play. Let's take a sounding here, 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time there. From the southwest Iowa area, kind of by the Des Moines Winterset area. And that's a pretty classic looking cold core-esque type sounding. Limited instability here on the NAM, only about 350 joules per kilogram mixed layer cape. But all of that, a lot of that instability is located in the lowest 3 kilometers, 0 to 3 kilometer cape, in excess of 100 joules per kilogram. With a little bit of veering of the winds in the low levels of the atmosphere, a little bit of curvature in the hodograph there. And this is kind of your classic low level or classic wind profile for cold core events. So would not be surprised to see a tornado or two up there. Deep layer shear definitely on the margins. It's about 40 knots, so enough deep layer shear to support supercells there. They will be very low topped. Again, all that instability piled below 500 millibars, but steep enough lapse rates to aloft to support some robust convection, maybe some isolated large hail reports, some marginally severe wind reports, and maybe a tornado or two out of the convection in the northern portions of the risk area. But let's focus on the southern portion of the risk area here. Here is our moisture. Starting off, we see those dew points. We look at our current surface map, dew points there in the 60s, really across much of East Texas at this point. Our 60 dew point isodrosotherm somewhere right in here at this time. That is expected to continue to advance inland as we get that strong low-level flow out of the southeast, pulling that moisture in off the Gulf, and that will shift east as our surface boundaries shift east as well. So plenty of moisture here for the southern portion of the risk area. Not something we could have said for yesterday's event, but you can see these 60s dew points continue to stream off to the north. The warm sector will be a little bit pinched, especially during the day and going into the evening hours. Kind of a triangular shape to it, kind of pinched off with northward extent there across northern Louisiana, maybe a couple counties north of the I-20 corridor, but not a whole lot of inland advance. If we were to have a stronger surface flow out in here, we'd have a much more robust, much stronger northward advance of this moisture for a wider warm sector. But here, not looking like a whole lot of real estate for storms to feed off of today, but we do have enough for the storms along the frontal zone. As the cold front will eventually catch up to the warm sector and the ongoing convection, that will be our forcing mechanism for more of a linearly organized complex. We'll see our initiating boundary there, and we'll look at our shear vectors. So you can see that flow much more parallel immediately along that boundary to the shear vectors. Cold front may even be back in here, but nonetheless, much more parallel shear vectors with respect to the initiating boundary, leading to a pretty quick transition to a linear mode. We may have the potential for prefrontal discrete supercells. We do have kind of enough real estate here, especially across southern portions of the risk area, across the southern half of Louisiana into far southeast Texas. That could provide for a discrete supercell threat. Going into the evening as well, we kind of see that a little bit fatter warm sector down here to the south could provide enough room for there to be some discrete supercells ahead of the line. See if we can see anything in the warm sector, any convergence boundaries at all. Not really seeing a whole lot here at the surface, at least. Here's kind of your warm front. If you look at our dew points, not really anything of note. Perhaps your actual warm front is right in here, maybe one of those marine boundaries. I don't know, it's a little bit tough to tell. Not really seeing much in the way of forcing mechanisms for discrete supercells in the open warm sector. Let's see at 850 millibars, not really seeing any convergence as well as we go into the evening. So it does not look like there's a whole lot of forcing mechanisms for storms in the open warm sector. So I think our main severe threat is going to come from the main line here back to the west along the cold front. And that will be our main severe threat today. Now, so that means storm mode will probably preclude a greater tornado threat, at least a significant tornado threat. But given the wind profiles at play, we could see a few significant tornadoes embedded in the line. So here we are at 21Z. Let's take a sounding here from west central Louisiana just to see what the environment's going to look like ahead of this line. and for any possible discrete supercells that may fire ahead of the actual line. And that's why we have that 10% significant tornado risk area today. Enough instability, fairly limited low-level lapse rates, very deep moisture, so limited low-level lapse rates. That doesn't really matter in the southeast all that much. I've seen plenty of tornado events with somewhat limited low-level thermodynamics, but plenty of instability to support robust updrafts, 1,300 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, 68-degree dew point there at the surface, so rich moisture there in the low levels of the atmosphere. And how about that wind profile? Strongly curved low-level hodographs, strong veering and strengthening of the winds with height. Your low-level jet there, 850 millibar winds at 50 to 60 knots there, so very strong low-level jet across this area, leading to impressive low-level shear, over 660 meters squared per second squared effective storm relative helicity, strong deep layer shear for supercells, so any embedded supercells or stronger mesovortex circulations within the line. There could be a few of those today with such strong low-level shear, and a decent component of the low-level shear vectors, a decent component of perpendicularity of the low-level shear vectors with respect to the forcing mechanism, which is the cold front. So we could see a pretty widespread risk for tornadoes across the line as it marches off to the east, and some of those circulations could be strong despite the storm mode. If we were to see a more discrete storm mode, if any discrete supercells can fire ahead of the line, they could very well take advantage of this strong low-level shear and produce a significant long-track tornado threat. So that'll have to be watched for sure. I don't expect there to be much discrete development ahead of the line, given the lack of overall forcing mechanisms in the warm sector, but we should be weakly capped over the open warm sector, so we could see a few supercells fire on the southeastern or eastern flank of the ongoing line, and those could have the greatest threat for some strong tornadoes. Hail, this is why hail not going to be much of a threat today. Strong low-level shear going to preclude large hail with these setups, but damaging wind also going to be a threat as well, as downdrafts, the stronger flow aloft, transported down to the surface through downdrafts, going to be pretty intense, some pretty intense gusts with the convective line as it moves through. As we go on into the evening hours, that warm sector will continue to shift off to the east. Here we are at 3Z, and you see the northern extent of the warm sector, basically to the Arkansas-Louisiana border there. Rolling Fork right in here. I know, this is kind of a rough time for those folks there, but there will be a tornado threat. We are expecting the warm sector to make its way up that way. Good news is that it will be pinched off up here, so not a lot of real estate at all for a robust tornado threat and severe threat in general. That threat will remain a little bit better farther to the south, where we have a little bit more real estate, a little bit more east-west real estate for storms to survive. So good news for those folks up there. Not so good news for folks down here in these southern portions of the risk area, from kind of central Louisiana eastward into Mississippi. Here we are at 3Z, so this is going to be at 10 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Let's take another sounding here ahead of the line, kind of near the Natchez, Mississippi area. Natchez to Vicksburg, and we maintain that pretty impressive profile. A little bit of convective contamination here you can see from the bars on the left, but should be good enough for our purposes here. Decent instability, actually increasing instability with time here, almost 1,800 joules per kilogram mixed layer CAPE, and plenty of low-level shear to support that tornado threat with any ongoing line, or with any circulations within the line, and any supercells ahead of the line. That threat will continue into the overnight hours, as we do have plenty of warm sector inland. That warm sector will decrease in size as we go into the morning tomorrow. So very limited threat as we go into the morning tomorrow, confined to really the coastal areas here of far southeast Louisiana, southern Mississippi, southern Alabama, western Florida panhandle. But that should continue into the overnight hours, providing that tornado threat given such strong wind profiles. Let's take a look at some convection allowing models here real quick before we end the video. So this is the 12Z HRRR. You can see how it's modeled the ongoing convection. Pretty messy. Once again, this convection should remain pretty tame for the next few hours before things ramp up in the afternoon. You'll see how things ramp up here going into the afternoon hours. If we start to see a little bit stronger cores within that convective line, we do see a little bit of development here on the HRRR out ahead in the open warm sector. So that will have to be watched for sure. Once again, with such strong wind profiles at play early on in this event, with that strong low-level jet over the region, those could have a tornado threat pretty quickly. Low-level lap rates being a little bit on the limited side could allow for those storms to struggle a little bit, which may kind of be a limiting factor initially. But I do suspect that we will see enough robustness from these updrafts to provide that tornado threat if any storms can fire in the open warm sector. Again, that's a pretty big if, but we'll have to watch that for sure. But again, the main threat going to be from the convective line back in here along the eastward marching cold front. Here we are at 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time. 7 p.m. Start to see some more robust cores in the line, and some kind of embedded supercells or some embedded little cores in here could foster that tornado threat as they move off to the east, especially down here where the warm sector is a little bit wider from central Louisiana eastward into Mississippi, and that threat continues into the overnight hours. Here we are at midnight, 1 a.m. Some strong cores continue in the line, so we could see some damaging wind and tornado threat materialize there. Warm sector gets pinched off into Tuesday morning, so the greatest threat will be with these storms down here on the southern end of the line, from southern Mississippi into southern Alabama and western Florida Panhandle area. Up in the northern sector, let's take a look at that real quick. Let's go to our Midwest sector. And here we are, some ongoing storms and rain up there this morning. We see a few stronger cores there here by about 3 to 4 p.m., so we could see those produce that low-end hail and wind risk. Some additional convection later on going into the evening hours, and the intensity of the convection will wane after dark, as these kind of events up there are very much focused on the thermodynamics, and of course as the sun goes down, the thermos get worse. So going to be mostly a daytime threat up there. A few little small storms. These are going to be small, low-topped supercells, if anything, and they will produce maybe some isolated large hail and a tornado or two. Here we are with the ARW model. We'll start here on the northern sector as we're already here. And you see a couple little storms here fire going into the late afternoon hours. Not any robust helicity tracks or anything from the models. These storms are going to be very low-topped once again and very small, so not really going to pick up any of those strong helicity streaks there. But we could see a few of these updrafts produce some isolated large hail and maybe a tornado or two, maybe a damaging wind gust as well. Down to the south, let's go to our southern sector here. So ongoing convection continues this morning. We see a proliferation of convection, and interestingly enough, we do see some convection out in the open warm sector early on. This might be a little bit early, might struggle for a little while, but we could see some discrete supercells out there, and those would need to be watched for that greatest threat for some strong tornadoes. Then we move into the overnight hours, that mostly convective line with maybe some embedded supercells in there. You see some kind of embedded supercells within the line there. Could foster some stronger tornadic circulations as they move across the central section of Mississippi, and then the threat continues into tomorrow morning. NSSL WRF model. Start with our southern sector here since we're already there. We do see some of that convection moving inland. Overall, just kind of a messy mode. Even the stuff in the warm sector looks like on all the models kind of congeals into more of a clustered mode out there in the warm sector, so that may be a good sign in precluding a stronger tornado threat with any discrete supercells. But then the convection continues along the line going into the overnight hours across Mississippi, but really just a solid line here, the forcing very much parallel to the to the cold front, or the wind shear vector is very much parallel to the forcing mechanism, so that will lead to a pretty linear organization to these storms, but nonetheless could see some embedded stronger cores in there, damaging wind threat for sure, as well as a stronger tornado threat in those stronger cores. Up to the north, let's go to our Midwest sector real quick. And you see here, we see a few stronger updrafts try to form here late afternoon across that western Iowa, northwest Missouri corridor, but not a very, very low-end severe threat there for sure. So that's going to do it for this video. Just wanted to give a quick little update on the forecast for today. We have had, again, that upgrade to enhanced risk level 3 out of 5 across that portion of northeast Louisiana, far southeast Arkansas, into much of the heart of Mississippi. Places like Alexandria, Jackson, Greenville, under the gun for that greatest severe threat there today. Starting this afternoon, really, the severe threat will ramp up from that ongoing convection, and then we'll see continued intensification of those storms along the line, and perhaps anything out ahead of the line going into the evening and overnight hours from within the enhanced risk here. This is mainly for the nocturnal risk as the storms move into this area. The tornado threat is going to be greatest here within that area, 10% hatched risk area across that central Louisiana to the Mississippi-Alabama border region, including Jackson, Mississippi. So that's where our greatest tornado threat is expected to be, greatest overlap of the best ingredients. Damaging wind, also a threat, especially within that enhanced risk area there, 30% wind risk there. Large hail, not going to be a threat really at all with these storms. Would be surprised to see any widespread hail reports here, but we do have a 5% hail risk as updrafts start to get going and really start to re-intensify later this afternoon in the early portion of their life cycle. Could see a few large hail reports. Up to the north, low-end risk as well across that western Iowa, northwest Missouri, eastern Kansas corridor. Few stronger updrafts along the cold front as it moves off slowly to the east. A little bit of a tornado risk there in western Iowa into northwest Missouri. And a large hail and damaging wind risk as well. Mostly in an isolated low-end sense, but still low-end all-hazards threat up there in that kind of cold core-esque setup. So that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.